Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to another video. Today we'll be covering the warships of the Sith. Not just one Sith Empire, the various Sith Empires which have existed throughout Star Wars history. Now, if you've been paying attention to the other videos I've put out during this sort of Sith week I've been doing on the channel, that's good, because we will be covering a lot of history and it does help provide some context. But even if you haven't, don't worry, I will try to explain everything that's going on here. Alright, so the true history of the Sith starts about 5,000 years before the Star Wars original trilogy with what was known as the Great Hyperspace War. Basically, the Sith and the Republic were sort of evolving independently. I've done an entire YouTube short which I'll link below on the origins of the Sith, so I'm not going to cover that in too much detail, but basically, Dark Jedi settled on Korriban, they took control of the Sith species there, and they created the Sith Order. Republic navigators accidentally stumbled upon Korriban, having discovered new hyperspace routes, and the Sith responded with an all-out invasion against the galaxy. The warships used by the Sith were largely alien to the Republic, and included most notably the Dartmouth class battleship. However, there were other ship classes. The Essential Guide to Warfare refers generally to Sith frigates, and we do see in several images ships that look distinct. Unfortunately, we don't know a whole lot of information about them specifically. Because of how the Dartmouth looks, it's my guess that some of these may have even been customized, but we also see that the Sith have a similar design language between their battleships and their troop carriers and other vessels. The Sith also had several ships they just called dreadnoughts. We hear about these most notably because of the Omen, which was a Sith dreadnought that crashed on the planet Kesh and led to the lost tribe of the Sith. There's also the very strange vessel known as the Sith Meditation Sphere. These weren't capital ships but were so important to battle that it's probably worth mentioning them briefly. Sith Meditation Spheres, as you might expect based on their name, allowed a Sith to amplify his or her dark side powers, especially when performing techniques like battle meditation. So you'd see Sith in their meditation spheres even at key battles. Anyway, the Sith did lose the Great Hyperspace War and were hunted nearly to extinction by the Jedi. The remaining Sith fled, and under the guidance of the Sith Emperor Vitiate and his Dark Council rebuilt. But the rebuilding would take over 1,000 years. While the so-called true Sith were gone, the galaxy did see several Sith threats emerge, each of which used their own battleships. What's interesting though is that these Sith largely came from within the Republic and the Jedi Order, so they didn't have pre-built warships like we saw before the Great Hyperspace War or the Great Galactic War, which I'll talk about in a minute. During the Great Sith War, we see Exar Kun and his Brotherhood of the Sith, no, not the Sith Brotherhood, that's different, partner with the Mandalorians and the Krath to fight the Republic, so they largely used ships of those factions. Krath ships included the half-a-kilometer-long Supremacy class cruiser, as well as other similar-looking ships that you can see in images like this. Well, Mandalorian Crusaders offered a variety of strange technology, including most notably the Pyramid-type battleship. Following the Great Sith War was the Mandalorian Wars, and although the Sith were not active combatants during this conflict, it is important because we do see several capital ships emerge, which would then be used by various Sith factions. And if you're wondering, these are the ships that we actually see in the KOTOR video games. That's because Revan and Malak were both originally Jedi. They fought for the Republic during the Mandalorian Wars. Then when they defected, they brought not only a ton of the Republic's military personnel with them, but also their ships. The first one of these was the Interdictor class cruiser, which a lot of people point out is one of the first Star Destroyer type ships in the Star Wars universe. You can see how this vessel in a lot of ways is cleaner in design than prior Sith ships, even though this was originally, again, a Republic vessel. There was also the less common but far larger and also still Star Destroyer-like Centurion class battlecruiser. One of these, the Ravager, was used by Darth Nihilus. So when you're talking about events that include Revan and Malak, including the Mandalorian Wars all the way until the Sith Civil War, generally that falls under the banner of the old Sith Wars. They ended about 4,000 years before BBYM being proximate. Move forward another 300 years and you have the Great Galactic Civil War. For that conflict, the Sith group that I talked about earlier, the ones that escaped at the end of the Great Hyperspace War and rebuilt for over 1,000 years, returned to the galaxy, and this is where you see a lot of the ships from the Old Republic video game. And again, let's contrast this with the things we've just been talking about. These warships were actually built by the Sith for war. They weren't taken from another faction, or they weren't the ships of another allied faction. These were purpose-built Sith warships. The most famous example of these was the Harrower class. For its era, at 800 kilometers long, the Harrower was a large and powerful warship, and it was used by the Sith in the years preceding during their invasion, then of course during the invasion itself. It came in several different variants and was produced in great numbers. The Sith did have some other smaller capital ships. One of the others, which is actually named, is the Terminus class, which was sort of an escort ship. These were really some of the main capital ships used by the Sith Empire during the Great Galactic War and subsequent conflicts. But that brings us to the new Sith Wars, which was basically 1,000 years of conflict between the Jedi and the Sith. Unsurprisingly, this war started out as Sith Wars usually do. Jedi defected from the Order, the first in this case being Darth Rune, and brought a bunch of his adherents with him, creating a new Sith Order. Unfortunately, while we do know some of the larger points of this conflict, a lot of the details are actually lost to us, and that includes warships. The only real warships of this era that I'm actually aware of are the ones mentioned in the Darth Bane trilogy, and the one mentioned is the Corsair battleship. Unfortunately, we don't get very much detail about that. There's also mentioned generally Sith dreadnoughts and Sith cruisers. After 1,000 years of the new Sith Wars, we have the Battle of Ruusan and eventually the Ruusan Reformations, and then 1,000 years of peace as the Sith worked quietly through the Rule of Two until, of course, we get to Emperor Palpatine. Arguably, any ship of the Empire was a Sith warship, so I'm not going to go over those. Obviously, the most famous one was the Imperial Star Destroyer itself. I think the Executor class Super Star Destroyer and the Eclipse class Super Star Destroyer are also particularly notable. Really, I think any ship of the Dark Empire is more Sith-y even than an Imperial ship. Then we have the ships used by Darth Krayt, and the One Sith, and arguably the Imperial vessels of that era as well can be called Sith because usually the Sith used them. But that's it. Those are the warships of the Sith Empire throughout over 5,000 years of Star Wars history. I want to know though, which one is your favorite? Which one would you like to command? And if you were in command of a Sith warship, your new flagship, what would you name it if you're a comically evil Sith, like is often the case in Star Wars Legends? Until next time though, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you check out the prior 2 or 3 that I put out. They're on similar topics and they might give further context to this video. Until next time though, be safe, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.